It began in a time when the world was a harsh and unyielding place. Communities huddled together in villages carved from stone and timber, struggling against the unforgiving elements. Fields were meager, and the threat of famine hung constantly in the air. Yet, in those harsh conditions, something extraordinary began to take root. People discovered that survival depended not only on individual strength but on cooperation. They learned to share resources, to trade skills, and to innovate against scarcity. Every day demanded ingenuity, and every hardship forged resilience. In the hills outside the Tiber, a small Roman settlement took shape. Soldiers trained in disciplined formations, practicing maneuvers to defend against neighboring tribes. Farmers tilled the rocky soil, coaxing life from it, while builders shaped crude stones into the beginnings of roads and aqueducts. In these early struggles, the citizens of Rome found unity. No single person could thrive alone, yet together, they built a city that would one day dominate the Mediterranean. The hardships etched a moral code into their culture, one that valued endurance, loyalty, and the tireless pursuit of common goals. Across the sea, on the windswept island of Britain, villagers eked out their existence. Fishermen braved stormy waters, while farmers relied on the fickle seasons to sustain their families. It was a land of scarcity, but scarcity brought innovation. Simple plows evolved into more efficient tools, fishing nets were woven with new designs, and trade between neighboring communities became a lifeline. The inhabitants understood that every decision could mean the difference between survival and despair, and this knowledge fostered ingenuity and discipline that would carry them forward. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, colonies struggled to survive in a land both promising and perilous. Dense forests and uncharted rivers hid threats and opportunities alike. Settlers built fortifications to ward off attacks, learned to cultivate unfamiliar crops, and formed tight-knit communities where each member's labor was essential. Every obstacle forced adaptation. Disease, hunger, and conflict shaped the settlers' character, instilling a sense of purpose that was inseparable from survival itself. Over decades, these societies began to harness the resources at their disposal with increasing skill. Trade routes were established, connecting distant towns and cities. Knowledge of agriculture, architecture, and governance expanded. Roads, bridges, and irrigation systems spread across territories, transforming human settlement from fragile clusters into thriving networks. Slowly, scarcity gave way to surplus. Grain stores accumulated, artisans perfected their crafts, and armies could be maintained to protect both borders and commerce. For the first time, these civilizations tasted a sense of abundance. There was enough food to sustain the population. Enough wealth to reward skill and innovation. Enough security to contemplate growth beyond mere survival. And yet, in the quiet triumph of their accomplishments, a subtle danger emerged. The very success that had been earned through struggle and ingenuity planted the seeds of a different challenge, one that would test not the strength of their arms, but the resilience of their values. In the glow of newfound comfort, the foundations of their civilizations would begin to shift imperceptibly, setting the stage for challenges that no amount of wealth or skill alone could overcome. As wealth accumulated, the rhythm of daily life began to change. No longer did every hand work the fields out of necessity, many found themselves seeking comfort and leisure instead. The stone streets of Rome, once echoing with the disciplined footsteps of soldiers and laborers, now echoed with the soft shuffle of silk slippers and the laughter of those whose needs had long been met. Marble villas rose above the city, adorned with mosaics and fountains that celebrated beauty rather than utility. Workshops that had once crafted tools for survival now produced intricate jewelry and ornamental wares, their value measured in splendor rather than function. Luxury spread like wildfire. Banquets grew grander each year, tables overflowing with exotic foods imported from distant lands, while servants scurried in elaborate choreography to attend to every whim. Music, poetry, and art flourished, but in the shadows of these triumphs, the moral code that had carried the civilization through famine and war quietly eroded. Discipline and sacrifice, once revered, became burdensome memories, replaced by indulgence and pleasure. What had been a society built on necessity and resilience now revolved around status and display. This transformation was not immediate. It crept forward with subtlety. Families who had once taken pride in hard work now sought comfort as a mark of success. Generations that grew up in abundance were taught the rituals of leisure, yet had little understanding of the struggle that had built the society they inherited. Young nobles wandered gardens and galleries, their conversations filled with trivialities, their eyes blind to the toil of the workers who sustained their world. Power was concentrated in the hands of the few who had mastered wealth and influence, and the many who labored silently became increasingly invisible, their voices unheard in the corridors of decision-making. The Romans gave a name to this change, luxuria. It described a moral decay born not of hardship, but of ease, a corruption of character that comes when survival is no longer at stake. The virtues that had defined the civilization, courage, loyalty, temperance, gave way to extravagance, vanity, and excess. Citizens learned to measure success not in honor or effort, but in the size of their villas, the richness of their garments, the splendor of their entertainments. Bread and circuses replaced duty, and image triumphed over substance. This pattern repeated across continents. In Britain, prosperous merchants and landowners built sprawling estates, their lands meticulously manicured, while tenant farmers struggled to maintain basic sustenance. In the colonies of the New World, settlers who had once labored side by side to build towns found themselves divided by wealth and position, the bonds of communal effort fraying as trade and surplus created new hierarchies. Everywhere, comfort became the arbiter of life. What had once been a society animated by necessity now moved to the rhythm of desire, its energy consumed not by survival, but by accumulation and display. And yet, despite this subtle decay, the civilizations themselves continued to grow. The surplus of wealth allowed for monumental achievements. Temples, bridges, palaces, and libraries rose in every city. Trade networks expanded further than ever before, connecting lands and peoples with unprecedented speed. And beneath it all, an illusion took root: the belief that abundance was permanent, that the prosperity hard-won through centuries of struggle would never fail. The generations born into ease, untested by scarcity, carried forward the civilization's achievements without the understanding of their fragility. They inherited wealth, but not the wisdom that had built it. And in this inheritance lay the seed of vulnerability. As comfort spread and indulgence deepened, the very traits that had created prosperity, resilience, discipline, and communal purpose, quietly slipped from their grasp. At first, the growing wealth felt like momentum, as if the civilization itself had discovered a rhythm that could never be broken. Cities expanded, markets overflowed with goods, and the reach of trade extended into distant lands. Merchants, bankers, and artisans thrived, and the circulation of currency gave the illusion that resources were limitless. Roads and ports teemed with movement, and distant territories sent exotic goods, spices, silks, metals, and gems to feed the insatiable appetite of the prosperous few. Every day seemed to confirm that abundance would endure forever. But momentum is deceptive. It can feel permanent until the first cracks appear. The pursuit of growth became an expectation rather than a privilege. Wealth was no longer a reward for ingenuity or effort, it was a standard to maintain. Every generation felt the pressure not only to inherit prosperity but to surpass it. Comfort, once a rare achievement, became a necessity. Those who were unable to sustain it were left behind, and those at the top sought more, constantly, without pause. In Rome, the expansion of the empire required ever greater expenditure. To pay for armies, public works, and luxuries, the state began to debase its currency, mixing base metals into silver coins. The people believed their wealth remained intact, unaware that the illusion of abundance was already faltering. In France, centuries later, paper money was issued on promises and speculation, its value untethered from tangible resources. When confidence evaporated, society collapsed into chaos, leaving ordinary people impoverished while a few hoarded whatever remained. The pattern was clear: the more a civilization relies on the appearance of growth rather than its substance, the more fragile it becomes. Across time, the same cycle repeated. Luxury bred expectation, and expectation demanded constant expansion. To sustain comfort, rulers and merchants alike took increasingly risky measures. Debt was embraced as a tool, speculation as a necessity, and artificial markets replaced the natural checks that scarcity once imposed. Wealth became an addiction. It no longer served life, it demanded it. The society that had once been shaped by discipline and restraint now revolved entirely around accumulation, often at the expense of morality, stability, and even survival. Illusion, once subtle, began to dominate reality. People believed they could have more without earning it. Cities glittered with opulence, but beneath the surface, systems grew strained. Workers labored to maintain lifestyles that were no longer sustainable. Soldiers, administrators, and common citizens carried the invisible weight of promises they could not fulfill. Those at the top became distant from the everyday struggle, perceiving prosperity as permanent, while the foundations of the civilization quietly weakened. In the colonies, in trading cities, and in empires stretching across continents, the consequences of this illusion were mirrored. Resources were consumed faster than they could be replenished. Crops failed, debts mounted, and social tension rose. The very networks that had once connected and strengthened civilizations became channels for instability. Yet outward appearances remained brilliant: marble halls, ornate palaces, and grand markets conveyed a confidence that masked growing fragility. Comfort had become both shield and cage. It protected civilization from the trials of scarcity but trapped it in the illusion that nothing could go wrong. Each generation grew up in abundance, untested by the struggle that had built the world around them. They inherited wealth and infrastructure, but they inherited little understanding of vulnerability. And as expectation became addiction, the first seeds of collapse quietly took root, waiting for the moment when illusion would meet reality. As the illusion of endless prosperity deepened, the foundations of society began to crumble in ways that were invisible to most. Systems that had once been strong and resilient became delicate and brittle, their complexity masking a growing fragility. Every network of trade, every financial instrument, every law and custom depended on trust in leadership, in stability, and in the permanence of wealth itself. But when prosperity becomes habitual, that trust begins to erode quietly, often unnoticed until it is too late. In Rome, senators lived in splendor, their villas adorned with frescoes and mosaics, while soldiers guarding the empire went unpaid for months at a time. The wealth that once sustained the city now enriched a few, leaving the many struggling to maintain the very systems they had built. The tension between opulence and necessity widened, and resentment simmered beneath the surface. Those who labored tirelessly to protect and maintain the civilization felt increasingly invisible, their contributions ignored, while those at the top pursued pleasure and status. Farther west, pre-revolutionary France mirrored this pattern. The nobility hosted extravagant feasts, adorned themselves in luxurious garments, and commissioned grand works of art, while peasants went hungry, burdened by taxes that fueled indulgence above all else. Communities that had once relied on cooperation for survival were now divided by wealth and privilege, and the moral bonds that had held society together began to fray. Every act of excess, every indulgent display of wealth, widened the gap between rulers and the ruled, and the first seeds of civil unrest were sown. Even in more modern contexts, the echoes of this fragility are unmistakable. Wealth and power concentrate in the hands of a few, while the many struggle to keep pace. Financial markets soar, yet they are underpinned by systems so complex that even the architects of prosperity no longer fully understand them. Debt and speculation replace labor and production as the engines of growth. What appears stable and abundant on the surface is, in reality, a house of cards built on illusion. The consequences of imbalance are not merely economic. They are moral. When trust in a system fades, when the many see the few thriving while their own labor goes unrewarded, a society's cohesion begins to break down. The shared purpose and collective discipline that had once sustained civilizations vanish. Citizens become disconnected from the institutions that govern them, and the sense of duty that had carried generations through hardship is replaced by cynicism and apathy. Rome's fall was not instantaneous, nor was it dramatic in a single day. It rotted slowly, over centuries. Armies still marched, laws were still written, debates still echoed through marble halls, but the spirit that had built Rome was gone. The resilience born of necessity, the unity forged in scarcity, the discipline that had guided every generation, all of it had eroded under the weight of comfort and indulgence. What remained were the hollow trappings of power, beautiful but fragile, incapable of sustaining themselves in the face of pressure. Across continents and centuries, the same pattern recurred. Empires and nations grew outward, accumulating wealth and prestige, only to discover that the very abundance they cherished had weakened their core. Fragility and moral decay moved hand in hand, and the collapse that followed was never sudden. It was the inevitable consequence of a society that had forgotten the lessons of its own history. By the time the warning signs became impossible to ignore, it was often too late. What had been a civilization of discipline, unity, and resilience had been replaced by one of indulgence, inequality, and illusion. And yet, even in decline, the story of prosperity continued to teach the same lesson, that comfort, if unchecked, can be more dangerous than scarcity, and that the true strength of a society lies not in its wealth, but in the character and wisdom of those who wield it. When prosperity died, the world did not end. Cities remained, temples still stood, and markets continued to bustle, but the balance that had once sustained empires had shifted irrevocably. Wealth and power no longer flowed evenly, nor did they serve the broader society. They concentrated in the hands of a few, while the majority struggled to maintain lives that had once been simple, secure, and purposeful. The civilization that had seemed eternal now moved like a body in slow decline, its form recognizable, but its vitality eroded. In Rome, the empire's vast territories became more difficult to govern. Governors and generals, seeking personal gain, diverted resources away from public works and defense. Local populations, once loyal, grew resentful of distant rulers who seemed indifferent to their struggles. Trade networks, which had been the lifeblood of prosperity, faltered under corruption and inefficiency. Wealth no longer nourished society, it protected only those who already held it. When crises arose, the empire was unable to respond effectively, and fractures widened until the once unified territories broke apart. The story repeated itself in Europe centuries later. Spain's golden age, fueled by the riches of the Americas, created a society of grandeur and art, yet it also generated stagnation and complacency. The nation's elite feasted on treasures extracted from distant colonies while domestic industry languished, leaving the economy fragile and dependent on illusion rather than productive labor. When new powers emerged on the continent, Spain's dominance crumbled, leaving behind a legacy of beauty and decay intertwined. Britain, too, experienced the rise and fall of dominance. Its empire spanned continents, and wealth flowed into London and other major cities, fueling the Industrial Revolution and expanding trade networks. Yet, the gap between the ruling elite and the working masses grew ever wider. Laborers endured grueling conditions in factories, while aristocrats enjoyed leisure and cultural refinement. Social tensions simmered, prompting reforms, revolutions, and political upheavals. Prosperity, while dazzling, had exposed the fragility beneath the gilded surface. In modern times, America rose on the foundations of commerce, industry, and innovation. Its cities expanded, skyscrapers reached toward the sky, and technology connected the world in ways previously unimaginable. Yet even here, the same pattern emerges: wealth concentrates, debt accumulates, and inequality widens. Those at the top enjoy unprecedented comforts, while the majority balance precariously between financial security and instability. The same lessons observed in ancient Rome, pre-revolutionary France, and colonial Britain echo once more: abundance, unchecked, can become a liability. Even as power shifts between empires, the underlying cycle persists. Each generation inherits the accomplishments of the previous one, often without understanding the hardships endured to achieve them. Grand structures, monumental wealth, and sprawling networks endure as monuments to ingenuity, yet they cannot protect against the erosion of discipline, unity, and wisdom. Civilizations fade not because they lack resources, but because they lose the moral and intellectual strength that once guided their prosperity. Across continents and centuries, the pattern remains unmistakable. Each society that believes its dominance will last forever eventually discovers that abundance is temporary, that wealth without understanding is fragile, and that the comfort of today can sow the seeds of tomorrow's instability. And yet, even in decline, civilizations leave lessons, structures, and innovations that outlast them, offering future generations the chance to learn from history if only they recognize the signs before it is too late. Even as empires fell and wealth shifted across continents, some societies began to recognize the patterns of prosperity and decline, learning to adapt in ways that allowed them to endure. After centuries of repeated collapse, humanity discovered that survival was not solely about accumulation, conquest, or grandeur. It was also about resilience, foresight, and balance. In the wake of crises, communities began to rebuild, not just their cities and economies, but the very principles that sustained them. After the devastation of the Great Depression, nations understood that the unchecked pursuit of wealth had left their societies fragile. Governments experimented with safety nets, unemployment insurance, and regulations designed to prevent the kind of reckless speculation that had shattered lives. People who had once believed prosperity to be guaranteed came to realize that wealth must be managed with wisdom, not taken for granted. Social systems emerged that acknowledged both human ambition and human vulnerability, weaving resilience into the fabric of society. Wars, too, forced lessons of survival and adaptation. After the global conflicts of the 20th century, nations created institutions intended to preserve peace, not merely enforce dominance. Organizations designed to mediate disputes, to foster communication, and to facilitate trade arose from the understanding that prosperity without stability is fleeting. The scars of past indulgence and overreach became guides for a more cautious, deliberate approach to progress. In this way, societies learned to temper ambition with foresight, building mechanisms that protected them from the moral and structural decay that had doomed previous empires. Even today, small movements reflect this enduring wisdom. In cities and rural areas alike, communities rediscover simplicity as a source of strength. Farmers cultivate sustainable crops, artisans revive traditional crafts, and neighborhoods organize initiatives that prioritize shared well-being over individual accumulation. Local economies flourish in ways that defy global patterns of greed, and people begin to measure success not in wealth or possessions, but in balance, cooperation, and long-term sustainability. Corporations and governments, too, slowly acknowledge the fragility of systems that prioritize profit above all else. Renewable energy projects, socially conscious businesses, and policies aimed at reducing inequality emerge as experiments in reversing the historical patterns of collapse. While the forces of excess and indulgence remain strong, these attempts at renewal demonstrate that societies can learn from the mistakes of the past, that prosperity can coexist with responsibility, and that abundance need not always lead to decline. Resilience, as history now reveals, lies not in the accumulation of resources, but in the cultivation of wisdom, discipline, and communal awareness. Communities that remember the hardships of previous generations, that honor the sacrifices upon which wealth was built, find ways to navigate abundance without succumbing to its traps. The lesson is subtle but profound: prosperity is neither inherently good nor inherently bad. It is a mirror, reflecting the character of those who inherit it. In the quiet victories of adaptation and foresight, the story of humanity's endurance continues. Wealth may rise and fall, empires may collapse, and dominance may shift, but societies that learn to balance ambition with responsibility endure longer, sometimes centuries beyond those that fail the test. Across history, the examples are clear. Survival is not about being the most powerful, the richest, or the most advanced. It is about maintaining perspective, fostering resilience, and nurturing the values that turn prosperity into a lasting foundation rather than a fleeting illusion. In the present age, the paradox of prosperity has never been clearer. Cities stretch toward the sky, highways crisscross continents, and technology connects billions of people in an instant. The world has never had more abundance, more food, more information, more comfort, more opportunity. Yet alongside this wealth lies a quiet unrest. Depression, loneliness, and a pervasive sense of emptiness ripple through communities that have never known true scarcity. Civilization has conquered hunger and disease, but it has not conquered the human need for purpose. People live in homes filled with every convenience, yet many wake to a life that feels hollow. Social media feeds sparkle with images of success, luxury, and achievement, while behind the screens, anxiety and disconnection fester. The same patterns that undermined Rome and France are present today, though they wear a different mask. The ease that once bred indulgence now fosters distraction. The abundance that could have been a foundation for wisdom has become a veil, hiding fragility beneath layers of technology, wealth, and convenience. Global debt now exceeds $300 trillion, 10 times the world's annual production. More than 70% of wealth is concentrated in the hands of less than 1% of the population. Over half of the people alive today live paycheck to paycheck. The contrast between extreme abundance and near constant struggle has never been so stark. Across continents, the disparity between those who hold power and those who sustain it mirrors the inequalities of past civilizations. The lessons etched into history by fire and collapse are still present, yet often ignored. Even in the world of information, knowledge alone cannot replace wisdom. We have access to centuries of records, stories, and data, yet few understand how to apply them to live meaningfully in abundance. Humanity has mapped the stars, decoded DNA, and traversed the oceans, but has not yet mapped the human heart in prosperity. The civilizations of old fell not from poverty, but from excess. Today, we risk repeating the same mistakes on a global scale. The very comforts that should sustain and protect us can, if unchecked, undermine our moral and structural foundations. Yet within this paradox lies opportunity. Small movements emerge across the globe, quietly rewriting the narrative of prosperity. Communities return to shared meals, to local trade, to education that emphasizes collaboration over competition. Individuals redefine success, measuring it not by net worth, but by balance, purpose, and contribution. Even in sprawling metropolises, there are pockets of renewal, gardens on rooftops, cooperative businesses, citizens investing in each other rather than simply in themselves. Technology, when guided by intention, offers the possibility of resilience rather than fragility. Renewable energy, sustainable agriculture, and digital platforms for civic engagement allow societies to thrive without repeating the mistakes of excess. But the lesson remains timeless: abundance alone does not guarantee survival. Prosperity is a mirror, reflecting the values, priorities, and wisdom of those who wield it. Without intention, without reflection, without restraint, the same cycles of illusion, indulgence, and collapse repeat themselves. The paradox of today's prosperity is unmistakable: humanity has more than ever, yet knows less than ever how to wield it wisely. We have conquered the material world, yet struggle to conquer the human condition within it. The challenge is not to accumulate more, but to understand what to keep, what to share, and what to honor. The civilizations of the past provide a warning: abundance is only a test, and its consequences are determined by how well those who inherit it navigate its hidden perils. As civilizations rise and fall, the same lessons whisper through the corridors of history. Those who survive, rebuild, and endure are not always the wealthiest or the most powerful. They are the ones who remember the principles that created their prosperity in the first place. Across time, Societies that learn from the mistakes of their predecessors develop safeguards moral, structural, and communal to preserve both wealth and purpose. In the aftermath of the Great Depression, nations recognized that abundance could not be assumed. Governments implemented social safety nets, unemployment programs, and banking regulations, creating a buffer between prosperity and collapse. Citizens learned that unchecked speculation and reckless growth could destroy what generations had painstakingly built. In this recognition lay a quiet revolution. Prosperity had to be guided by responsibility, not desire alone. Wars, too, taught harsh but invaluable lessons. After the devastation of two world wars, nations established international systems designed to maintain peace, foster trade, and prevent the concentration of power that had previously led to ruin. Institutions like the United Nations, trade agreements, and collaborative economic alliances were born from a collective understanding. Wealth and influence without oversight are fragile, and stability requires intentional structures and shared purpose. Even in smaller communities, lessons of endurance manifest in tangible ways. Farmers return to traditional methods that respect the cycles of nature. Neighborhood cooperatives organize to support members through hardship, sharing resources, knowledge, and labor. Artisans revive skills that honor both craft and utility. In these places, prosperity is not measured by gold or material accumulation, but by resilience, adaptability, and community strength. These pockets of renewal echo the same principles that allowed civilizations to survive scarcity, discipline, cooperation, and foresight. The modern world provides opportunities for similar lessons on a grander scale. Sustainable energy, circular economies, and socially responsible business practices all reflect an understanding that growth without purpose is hollow. Yet these solutions remain fragile unless society internalizes the wisdom they represent. Prosperity can be a teacher, but only if its inheritors are willing to listen. The civilizations that fail to heed history's lessons repeat the patterns of indulgence, illusion, and fragility no matter how advanced their technology or abundant their wealth. The antidotes to decay are subtle, yet profound. Communities that nurture discipline and gratitude, that honor the contributions of those who came before, and that value cooperation over mere accumulation build a kind of immunity to the corrosive effects of wealth. Civilizations endure not because they are rich, but because they understand what richness truly means, a balance of material security, moral integrity, and collective purpose. History, therefore, is not merely a chronicle of rise and fall, it is a guidebook. From the ruins of Rome to the courts of pre-revolutionary France, from the golden cities of Spain to the skyscrapers of New York, the narrative is clear. Prosperity is a test, a mirror held up to society, reflecting whether its people possess the wisdom, restraint, and vision to sustain what they have built. Those who fail the test are remembered in ruins and faded glory. Those who succeed endure, passing forward structures, principles, and lessons that outlast material wealth. In the quiet victories of thoughtful societies, there emerges a truth that spans centuries: abundance alone does not create strength. Only intention, balance, and the conscious cultivation of values can transform prosperity from a fleeting reward into a lasting legacy. To inherit wealth without understanding its fragility is to invite the very collapse that history has repeated so many times.